You could almost feel the virtual fist pumps from Kansas fans when news broke last week that basketball coach Bill Self had threatened a lawsuit against the NCAA. KU and the NCAA haven't held anything back in their dueling public statements involving the NCAA's investigation into the basketball program. But on today's SportsBeat KC, KU beat writer Jesse Newell provides a deeper explanation into the lawsuit threat and why KU might hope it doesn't come to that. Later, football is the topic, and Kansas got some good news on the health front when it came to athletes returning to campus. Fingers are crossed. It's Tuesday, June 23rd, and I'm Blair Kirchhoff. Let's get started with Jesse Newell. Hey, Jesse, how you doing today?
Doing all right, Blair. Trying to get some feeling back in my mouth. We're working on it.
Yes, a little trip to the dentist today. I had one last week. Did they put the temperature thing up to your head, or how'd they take your temperature?
Yeah, it's like the radar guns in baseball. They kind of shoot your forehead, and automatically they know that you're 98.2 or whatever. So I've never been 98.2 on my fastball, so I'm sure glad that I was 98.2 when it came to my temperature.
Yeah. Well, hope everything worked out okay for you at the dentist.
We'll see. When it all becomes unnumb, I will let you know.
Okay. All right. Very good. Hey, so late last week, story breaks, and I wanted to talk to you about it. It is involves Bill Self and considering legal action against the NCAA in light of the investigation, the NCAA investigation into the program. Hasn't done it yet, but is considering the legal action against the NCAA. Take us through it, Jesse. What is what is Bill Self's issue? And of course, Bill didn't talk about it. We got information from his attorney, Scott Thompson. But just take us through it, Jesse, and what's going on here.
Yeah, I think it's important to kind of clarify this and to make sort of clear what's going on because, again, when these things happen and they're sort of legal matters, they can be sort of complex, sort of complicated, and I think sometimes maybe the wrong message gets out there or maybe the wrong inclination that a lot of fans have when they see this from the outside and perhaps, get the wrong idea of what's actually going on here. So you're right. The main message is that Scott Thompson, Bill Self's attorney, wrote a letter to the NCAA basically saying to hold on to your documents, make sure this evidence is preserved because potentially Bill Self down the line could consider legal action against the NCAA. And so I've heard from a lot of KU fans basically just saying, good for Self, take him on, when's the fight, that sort of thing. And I don't think that's exactly the correct take in this whole matter. And it's sort of interesting, Blair, you can go back. I've been doing some research on this, and Todd McNair, it should sound very familiar to you, Todd McNair, because when I heard the name, I was like, that sounds really familiar for some reason. And then it clicked. It's the former Chiefs running back that I watched growing up in the area. But he has and still has a very interesting and ongoing case against the NCAA that is sort of similar to what Bill Self potentially would do in the future, which basically claims defamation of the NCAA. But he was the USC running backs coach as part of the whole Reggie Bush thing. And basically at the end of it, he got a 1-year show cause and could not work in the NCAA anymore and had struggles getting a job after that. But his lawsuit started in 2011. It was in California, had to go through a lot of judges, a lot of different basically hoops to jump through to get to it. And then finally got settled in 2018 with a jury trial, but they found in favor of the NCAA. So a 7-year process, sort of the same thing that Bill Self potentially could go through, and it found in favor of the NCAA. However, just recently that case now is going to get a new jury trial because they found that one person on the jury had a connection to the NCAA, had previously had a family member work for the NCAA. So it's kind of getting back into the limelight as well. But what's interesting about this case, looking into it, you just mentioned the key character, Scott Thompson, is Bill Self's attorney. We'll go look at who originally was Todd McNair's attorney, Scott Thompson. So this letter here basically says that Bill Self is, if it wasn't clear before and all this language has been spoken back and forth, they're not bluffing here. You know what I mean? Like they're potentially, if this thing does not go Bill Self's way, they potentially are going to sue the NCAA in a similar manner to what Todd McNair did. And just because a jury did not find the NCAA responsible here. There's still kind of like the David Beatty case. There was a whole mess of things that were brought up in this case that did not shine positive light on the NCAA, including some documents from the Committee on Infractions that were pretty embarrassing, basically, where they were making all these claims against Todd McNair and basically going after him that they potentially did not want to see the light of day in the limelight. However, having said all that, Blair, this is not something that Bill Self or anybody wants to get it to. You know what I mean? Like if Bill Self sues the NCAA, it will be because something very severe happened to Kansas and him personally. So this is basically, if you're Scott Thompson, again, this has happened in the past with him before, so he sort of has a playbook with this, but this is laying the groundwork as Bill Self's attorney to potentially set something in the future just in case it's needed. But again, for all parties involved, and I would include the NCAA in that because they have a lot to lose with this case, I don't think anybody wants it to come to that point where Bill Self is potentially suing the NCAA, because if that happens, then this whole thing exploded. And this is kind of a mess that somebody will have to try to clean up. So that's a long answer to your early question, but it is sort of fascinating when you get to these deeper levels and to sort of the ties that have happened here and the similarities to the former Chiefs running back Todd McNair. But for Bill Self, again, some fans out there have heard them say, great, Bill Self's going after him, go get him, Bill. No. If this case goes to trial, it's going to be, it probably won't be a 7-year-long process. That seems kind of like a California outlier, but it'll be a years-long process, and it would be the result of something very bad happening to Bill Self as part of this NCAA case. So for all parties involved, it's better off if that never happens.
Yeah, and the Todd McNair example is for 1 year, a 1 year show cause, and
yes,
it's a 7-year battle that may be being relitigated right now. So as you said, okay. So what is the what's the crux of the issue though for Bill in this? Thompson said in his letter that that he brought up some issues that we've talked about previously that have been out there. That basically it reflects the Kansas response to the NCAA in terms of, look, we're not denying things happen, but these happen in college basketball programs. The shoe and apparel company as a booster. So what else is here? What else is going on? What is the basis of this?
Yeah, I think again Scott Thompson, we have that letter available inside of our story that was posted last week, kansas.com. If people want to go and just sort of read exactly the language in there and what he's alleging here, but I think it's a couple things. The crux of this case, what it will and always will come back to is the NCAA is trying to establish in that KU had these level 1 violations, these 5 level 1 violations in men's basketball. The way to get Kansas guilty of that, basically, or to try to prove them guilty of that, is to say that Adidas and the representatives were boosters of the school, and that Bill Self and Curtis Townsend should have known that those guys were boosters of the school. They were, they had KU's interest in mind. Now, that is a new thing that has never been tried under NCAA before. You know what I mean? So I think that's part of it, because if you look at the letter that you've talked about with Scott Thompson, he mentions the Athletic article from Seth Davis where Mike Bray, who was just, the outgoing NABC president, talked about, hey, I would be surprised if that was a new rule, because everybody works with their shoe apparel companies. Everybody talks to them when it comes to recruiting. And so you kind of go down a slippery slope if you start to say, well, Adidas is a booster for Kansas. Well, now you have kind of a Pandora's box here of like, okay, to these AAU events, if Nike is giving money to one of these AAU programs and then that kid commits to Nike at Duke, is that a problem? Or you can just kind of think of all these other possibilities that happen with it. The other thing, if you look at the actual notice of allegations, sometimes it can be sort of misconstrued in there, but the Bill Self, what they're finding him responsible for is sort of what I talked about earlier, that he should have known about this in this program. He should have known that this was taking place. But it's a little bit different from some of the other cases, because the notice of allegations does not tie him directly to payments being made. It basically says he should have known about what Adidas was doing and stopped those representatives from it happening. So again, part of the defamation here is maybe allegations being made where there's sort of an insinuation that Bill Self was making the payments. And like in the NC State case, there is a more direct tie of an assistant coach making payments, those sorts of things. So I think it's a long way of saying, that again, laying the groundwork, potentially having this ready if it's ever needed in the future. But there's that really strong message from Thompson in that letter, basically to say somebody's trying to take down a Hall of Famer and his career in this one sort of big swing here. And so it's interesting if you look back to the Todd McNair case, there is some similar language there when it comes to trying to. I think the word there was collateral damage in that case, basically make Todd McNair collateral damage for an NCAA that was trying to reassert its power, that sort of thing. And you can see some similarities in this case. I think that would be the argument that if this ever got to that point that KU side would be making, or not KU side, that Bill Self's attorney would be making, that basically the NCAA overstepped bounds and needed blood from someone, and that Bill Self was sort of collateral damage here. So again, part of a long and extended case, but I think the evidence there, especially with the previous cases out there, like the Todd McNair case, attorneys for Bill Self and Bill Self will want to make sure that the NCAA is doing everything right here and not basically just going out for blood to get blood. And that's potentially the case that Bill Self would make in any sort of trial. But again, I think for all parties involved, nobody wants it to get to that point, because at that point, it'll get very ugly for both sides and become a very bitter legal battle for both of the sides in this matter.
Right, and here's the quote from the letter from Thompson, speaking to what you just mentioned, and he says, "To put it bluntly, the NCAA enforcement staff is attempting to end Mr. Self's long and very successful coaching career for conduct which all coaches engage in, and in which the NCAA is known for many years as commonplace and permissible." So that's what Thompson said about it.
Yeah, Blair, you hit on the key word there, which is permissible. I think that's a key word throughout this whole thing as everyone goes forward, is that I just talked about the Adidas representatives and shoe companies working with coaches when it comes to recruiting. And so again, the argument there is basically saying you are trying, like you quote in the letter, basically ending Bill Self's career, because the argument there is that he should have known about this, or should have known Adidas was a booster, or should have known that this was taking place. The argument from Thompson in that letter is basically just saying, hey, look, even Mike Bray, who is considered by almost everybody as a clean coach, as a guy who follows the rules, he's the one saying that this is stuff that happens to him. He's the outgoing NABC president, and he's saying that, of course, I talk to shoe companies when it comes to recruiting. So basically, their argument, Scott Thompson's argument, Bill Self's argument, is that the NCAA is trying to find Bill Self guilty. And potentially, you mentioned a show cause is at least on the table, or a long suspension. They're trying to really disrupt his career based off of something that not only has it never been tried before in the NCAA, but that big word you mentioned, permissible. It is permissible contact with Adidas. Now, again, that's a lawyer's agreement, or a lawyer's argument there, and that's Bill Self's argument. And obviously, those are things that are going to be argued over time. But that is a very important word there, and that is kind of what would make up potentially a future lawsuit, is if it was found that the NCAA overstepped in bounds. And again, they're going to kind of hint back or hit back over and over again on the fact potentially that, hey, this is something that happens with a lot of coaches out there. And not only that, it's something that is allowed and that coaches like Mike Bray believe should happen, even when those sorts of coaches are the ones that are believed to be the cleanest of the clean out there. And they're the ones partaking in the same sort of activity that KU and obviously Bill Self are being alleged of partaking in.
You brought up the Todd McNair example early, and you beat me to an example. I wasn't going to go Todd McNair. I was going to go Jerry Tarkanian, who went through a long, drawn-out process with the NCAA. And I'll just briefly go over what Tark, the former UNLV coach, coach of the 1990 national championship run in Rebels, and when he was at Vegas it was in 1977 that the NCAA put Vegas on 2 years of probation, and they pressured the school into suspending him. And Tarkanian sued the NCAA and said that, look, to do something like that is to violate his right to due process. And he got a favorable ruling from a Nevada judge who issued an injunction. So Tarkanian remained the coach. And that case eventually made it to the Supreme Court. And in 1988, the Supreme Court ruled that the NCAA had the right to discipline its school members. But in that decade, from the time that the NCAA pressured Vegas until the Supreme Court ruled, it became pretty apparent that the NCAA enforcement process was stacked heavily against the schools, and for reasons. There was no due process, and so basically, NCAA got a victory in that they ruled the Supreme Court ruled in favor. They were able to enforce their members, but it was a long drawn out process, as it is with Todd McNair and Southern Cal with football. And as we know, Tarkanian never missed a year of coaching UNLV and had a long career and ended up in the Naismith Hall of Fame, as is Bill Self right now, and is really seen as one of the great college basketball coaches of all time. So there is precedent for legal action against the NCAA. But as you mentioned earlier, if it comes to that for Kansas and for Bill Self, then maybe not a great thing.
No, it's not, Blair. And I think you make a good point. And again, this is me staying at a Holiday Inn Express last night. So I want to tell everybody I'm not a lawyer, but here I am reading up on lawyery stuff. So I'm going to pretend like I know something here. But I think it's interesting too, if you sue for something like Todd McNair, sue for defamation, the standard, the bar is pretty high from what I've read. Not only you have to go out there and prove that the statement was false, but you have to sort of prove that it was made maliciously. And so what's interesting about Todd McNair's case is that I talked about that 7-year process it took to get to a jury. And usually these things get settled before then. We talked about David Beatty's case. It seemed like it was going to go to trial for a while. And then, of course, it got settled out of court. I mean, court is expensive, those sorts of things. But what's interesting about that is over that time period, there were many different judges from what I've read and researched about this that basically said, hey, Todd McNair, you got a case here. You have a case. This thing can keep going, keep moving. And there's like anti-SLAPP laws. It has to continue to get by, all these sorts of things. So it had to move through all these processes. But the danger there is it got in front of a jury and there's no guarantees with a jury. I mean, you don't know what's going to happen there. So I don't know necessarily that we can look at that case and just say, oh, the NCAA absolutely won there. And again, we talk about the back and forth pull with the PR. I mean, there were lots of NCAA documents, emails that basically were, NCAA members came out very strongly in emails against Todd McNair that usually they want that stuff hidden behind closed doors. And instead,
right,
as part of discovery, it comes out and people start to see the inner workings, start to see, hey, maybe this was not a clean process from the beginning. And the one thing that kind of pops in my mind is you remember the comments that Stan Wilcox made to Dennis Dodd early in this process, where he talked about how severe the punishments were going to be for these schools involved. And I know there's been lots of mention in the KU letters since, basically to say, hey, you're trying to basically make a verdict before these people have been heard and had their process play out as the NCAA process is supposed to play out. So there's danger and there's risk on both sides here. So for the NCAA, if this did come about, potentially there still could be a settlement because they wouldn't want a lot of that come to the light of day. But again, the danger is to have some of that discovery come out and potentially lose a landmark case. For Bill Self, obviously, the thing to lose is, his career. I mean,
right.
If he got a show cause, if he got a long suspension, if he couldn't work in college anymore, yeah, I mean, this is a course of action he can take, but it's not the course of action he would want to take. And that would take, as you mentioned, years. It would be a drawn-out process. It would work out over time. You talk about Tarkanian, we talk about Todd McNair. It might not take that long, but it would be a drawn-out process. So both of these sides have a lot to lose. I think there's no question about that. But in the meantime, it is posturing. It is a statement sent across, and it is, I think, a very definite message to basically, if there was any question from before, Bill Self's not bluffing here. I mean, if this thing doesn't go his way, this is an avenue that he is going to pursue. And obviously, the groundwork has to be set for the NCAA to keep all those documents I just talked about. That's in that Thompson letter to say, hey, make sure your evidence is preserved, because potentially that could be part of discovery and go a little bit similar to the Todd McNair case, where you could potentially find some NCAA documents that could help Bill Self in a future case. So sort of fascinating in that way, but I think anybody who tells you that, yes, Bill Self is ready to stand up the NCAA and knock him out, That's not exactly what this is. This is a measure that Bill Self, I'm sure, does not want to get to, because if he does, it means something very serious happened, and it happened not in his favor.
Very good. All right, Jesse, let's take a break. And when we come back, we will switch sports. Hey, it's Blair. We have a special subscription offer for SportsBeat KC listeners, unlimited digital access to the Kansas City Star's award-winning sports coverage. Sign up now for 1 year of Sports Pass for access to all the sports news, features, and columns presented on the kansascity.com site, and it's only $30. That's a 40% savings off our regular rate. Your subscription will automatically renew after the initial term at $50 unless you tell us to cancel. Your subscription helps support the sports coverage of kansascity.com and the Kansas City Star, and that support has never been more important. Please visit kansascity.com/SportsBeatKC offer to get this special offer. And as always, thanks for listening. Okay, we're back with Jesse Newell, who covers Kansas for the Kansas City Star and Wichita Eagle. And on yesterday's SportsBeat KC, Jesse, we had Kellis Robinette, covers Kansas State, and we had Matt Conley, who covers Clemson for the state in Columbia, South Carolina. And we had those two on to speak to the problems in the football programs at K-State and Clemson when it comes to the coronavirus. Kansas State had 14 positive tests. They have shut down or suspended their workouts, and Clemson had 23 positives. And even though they have so many, they did not shut down, but in both cases, isolated, quarantined the athletes, and they're just two of a handful of schools. We've heard others like Houston, which has suspended its workouts. Texas has had high numbers. LSU has had high numbers of football players back on campus, along with other athletes and staff members who have tested positive. Well, Kansas has had athletes back as well, and Kansas is one of the schools. Again, I said this on Monday, and I'll continue to say it. I really appreciate it, and I think it's a good public service for schools to make this information public, and not all schools are doing that, but K-State did, and Kansas did as well, and Kansas, at least initially, got some good news when it came to testing for COVID-19. Tell us what the numbers were.
Yeah, so they tested 196 people total. That was 86 football players and then 110 staff members. They gave them all the swab, and then on the players, they gave them the antibody test too. Jeff Long talked about that. I mean, there's a lot of question marks about the antibody test. I'll just say that out loud because I think that's kind of the elephant in the room here. But out of precautionary reasons, Jeff Long said that they had consulted, their Kansas team health and the system that kind of they have in place, and that they felt that was better to do to see if potentially players had contracted it before. But out of all that, one player tested positive currently for the coronavirus, and one player tested positive for the antibodies. So that's out of 196. Now, again, the deep breath is here, and I agree with you, Blair. I think KU deserves a lot of credit, and a lot of credit in general, if I can speak sort of generically, because ever since Douglas Girod became chancellor, he is a doctor himself. He worked very closely with the medical center, and they created this Kansas Team Health, where now strength conditioning coaches, trainers, they all are working now underneath other medical people instead of working for coaches. So it adds kind of a layer of protection in there that KU doesn't have to do, but it is good for the student athletes. Sometimes when the student athletes don't have many rights, you might be forced out there to play or those sorts of things. It is a good measure to have to try to protect those athletes a little bit better. But ever since Douglas Girod has been in charge here, they have taken actionable steps to try medically to do things in the right way for their student athletes. I think this is another example where, like you talked about, making clear who tested positive, or not exactly who, but how many did. I think that's a good step. The question mark I have, and this is the question, which is K-State reported that when all their players first got back to campus, they had no positives. And then very quickly, they started to escalate. Those numbers, KU did not put a timestamp with them. So potentially that 196 could have been when everybody first checked back into campus. So it sounds weird to say, but if those are the very first results, then Kansas, with one coronavirus case, was actually worse than K-State, which had none to start with. and the thing kind of spread from there. So I hope the updates will keep coming. Again, based off everything KU has done and Douglas Sherrod has done, I have good reason to believe, based on earlier actions, that the updates will continue to come. But it is just a starting point. It has to be an encouraging starting point for now to only have one, and believe that you could potentially can kind of contain that one. But as we saw with K-State, as we have seen with Clemson and LSU out there, this thing can kind of spiral out of control if a few guys get it and a few guys get it, and they kind of get exposed to other people. So it's sort of still wait and see. But as you mentioned, I think for now, that has to be considered an encouraging moment for KU athletics, that only 1 out of 196 tested positive for coronavirus right now.
You make a good point, and you're right that the initial report from Kansas State was positive as well. The news was good, I should say, and then a week later, they're shutting things down. Jesse, I don't know if this plays a part in this. This is all new to everyone, and we're all going through it for the first time. But this is an issue that Kellis and Matt brought up on Monday. Look, college kids are college kids, right? It's tough to it's tough to say you can't socialize, you can't be with other people. Even in the summer, bars are open in some places, restaurants have reopened, and you're just going to be around other people, and these are young healthy people. That, however, is how the virus spreads, and you have one person go to a bar or restaurant, and they bring it back to the workouts, and all of a sudden it's now you're exposed to other people. And I guess is this I guess what I'm going to ask is this a warning sign for college campuses when they reopen, and for when all the teams are back, and schedules are out, and we're at the beginning of the fall season for not just football, for all fall sports, and then going into winter sports. And you live in Lawrence, and I mean you know what's open, what's not on Mass Street, and where the students tend to hang out. How do you size up what what students are going through when they come back on campus, and how that might play into what's a football season or a sports season?
Yeah, it's tough. I think you've heard Dr. Fauci basically talk about this a lot, where one of the big things he's talked about for sports to return is the ability to kind of create a bubble, to kind of
Yeah,
create
that's right.
a space for yourself to kind of contain people inside it. And in professional leagues, that is somewhat feasible. Maybe not 100% feasible, but somewhat feasible. Colleges, it's just not. It's not. We can't really get any other way around it. And there's all these things. You try to think about a million things with this, but then something happens like this. What happened last week, and then you think of a million more. You talked about some schools are saying they're coronavirus positives. Some schools are not. So if you're Kansas and you've been very forthright about it, and you're playing New Hampshire the first week, and they don't have the money to test their athletes, and you've talked about how your students and your athletes' welfare is number one priority, what do you do? I mean, that's what do you do? I don't know the answer to that. And obviously, for this thing to work out at all, it sounds very harsh, but it's going to have to require some people to basically kind of become like the right side of my lip right now, which is numb to some of these positive tests, because that's going to happen. It just is. And so I don't know the feasibility. I mean, obviously, the people that want the sports to restart, they say, hey, this is not a demographic that's in danger. College age kids basically do not die from this. The jury is still out on whether a couple things. Number one, whether the coronavirus creates long-term damage in people's bodies. And I can't imagine the class action lawsuit that somebody could have if potentially this summer and rushing people back created lung problems for a whole generation of college athletes. I wouldn't want to envision that. And then also just the ability, as you mentioned, for that to be spread to other people. And for now, for K-State's thing to shut it down, it seems very reasonable. It seems like a very smart thing to do. But what if that happened week 1? What if out of 14 coronavirus positives, if 10 of them were on the defensive line because they probably all got it in a very close setting, and you have no defensive linemen? That's sort of, even if this is going to happen, that's sort of the questions that go through your mind. And if it happened week 1 for K-State, I'm assuming that they couldn't play their first 3 games. I would assume that's the case. So, yeah, there's challenges, there's difficulties here. I can definitely empathize and understand why there was a belief a month ago when things seemed a little bit better, honestly, that you need to try this and see where it goes. You can always change your mind at the end. But I think that the more that happens, the more questions that get brought up, and the more it seems like if there is a season at all, it is going to be very disjointed. It is going to be teams that are fine and teams that are not fine, and teams that have most of its team contracted, and teams that are basically untouched. But it does create a lot of complications when you're trying to figure out a schedule and bringing people together, and just the logistics of everything happening. So yeah, a lot of answers we don't have right now. But the short answer to your question is, student athletes right now don't. Again, they're starting to get name, image, likeness. In the NCAA, they're starting to get stipends. For a long time, though, the college athletes, the NCAA athletes, were the ones with the least amount of power. So their motivations are probably going to be different than professional athletes who know that this is their livelihood, this is how they're making their money. You're right, Blair. If you show up back on a college campus and you're a college kid, you're probably going to want to go to a party. and you know what? I was in college too. So were you, Blair? Yep. I don't think I'm speaking out of turn. We went to parties too. So I'm not really blaming anybody, and I totally understand that, but it just makes it very difficult to see how this sort of season is going to function if those sorts of normal things happen and outbreaks are a response or a byproduct of that very normal college behavior happening on a college campus.
Yeah. So in about 3 weeks, we'll talk to SEC coaches, and then a week after that, Big 12 coaches, for media days, which are going to be virtual this year, Zoom meetings and not in person, which makes all kinds of sense. And I think that'll be the only topic that'll come up. And are we going to play? Is it going to be a normal season? I think not. And for all the reasons you mentioned. So my parting thought is to wear a mask when you're out in public, and maybe we can begin to see some light at the end of the tunnel with this. It's only June 23rd, so college football season's still more than 2 months away. But I don't know, the news of the last 7 to 10 days just not encouraging at all. So,
well, I've got some encouraging, Blair. I can start to feel the right side of my tongue. So we're going to end this on a positive note, and I might be able to drink something without it drooling out the side of my face here in about 30 minutes.
Well, you did this with half a tongue tied behind your back, which was phenomenal. All right, Jesse, great catching up, buddy. We'll do it again soon.
Thanks, Blair.
That'll do it for today. Thanks to our production staff of Derek Donovan, Savannah Smith, Randy Mason, Beth Welsh, Jeff Rosen, and Chris Fickett. A tip of the cap to Jesse Newell for joining me today to talk KU sports. Links to stories about the Jayhawks by Jesse Newell and Gary Bedore can be found in the show notes and on kansascity.com. Hey, earlier in the episode, you heard me talk about the Sports Pass offer. Still stands, still a good one, $30 for a year's worth of sports coverage. It includes the Sports Extra with the e-edition. I just got finished reading its 23 additional pages of national sports coverage today. Here's an even better offer. Buy the entire Kansas City Star product. Sports news, features, commentary, analysis, the whole thing. You get all the stories written by my talented colleagues, plus extra news, sports, and business coverage. The details can be found at account.kansascity.com/subscribe. That's account.kansascity.com/subscribe. And whether it's the Sports Pass or the full subscription, you're getting and supporting the best sports and news coverage in Kansas City and helping us produce programs like SportsBeat KC. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back on Wednesday with another episode.